When you're discussing the habits with your clients that they have and things you want to change, how do you start that conversation? Like, how do you broach that topic? Because I think a lot of people view habits maybe differently than a nutrition coach does. They don't necessarily even evaluate what they do on a day-to-day basis and how it interacts with food necessarily.
Well, I mean, I guess like starting like habit wise, I don't know, the way I guess I kind of get going with people is like we get going and then we find a barrier and basically we see that they do something in their day that is getting in the way of them reaching their goals. And then from there we can kind of unpack, okay, well, why do you do that thing?
Mm.
Sometimes it's literally just they made a decision years ago and it's kind of been just on autopilot. And so there is no like emotional connection. It's just literally a decision they made and they've just been running that. Other times it's a way they deal with stress or like a way to unwind after work, or a way to deal with anxiety. So that is typically how I do it is like, let's get rolling, see what is getting in the way. Typically it is some sort of habit. And then, okay, let's look at that habit. Let's look at why you do that habit. And then let's find a replacement for that habit that supports your goals.
That's perfect. Because I think, Steve, what I wanted to get at there was that some habits may just be habitual. Like, I don't know, I do this because I do it. But there are plenty of habits which fit a emotional or at least a practical need in our lives. And I think sometimes coaches who want to focus on like changing habits, they just kind of get a list of things that people who are lean do. Like here's some habits is like eat more vegetables. And it's like, that's not really habit change, bro. Like that's just telling someone to eat more vegetables. Like we have to evaluate at an individual level, why is someone doing what they're doing? And if you can have very reasons for that. So I think that's a really key thing you touched on there. So let's briefly talk about that. Why does it matter if someone has a habit that they're doing for a reason versus something that has just kind of become a funky part of their algorithm? Steve-O.
Well, I would say if somebody has something they're doing for a reason and it's something that is going against their goals, then they're going to constantly be like white knuckling it as you described, because they're constantly going to be like, okay, I do this thing because I get nervous, but it's actually causing something in my life that's going against my goals. So it's like, unless we address that habit, like it's either going to be really hard to like keep fighting that thing, or it's just going to keep popping up and getting in the way of their goals. That's why that article was all about. Like, I've just found like through experience, it's much easier to like find an alternative habit for something than to just say, hey, don't do that thing anymore. Because like when somebody gets nervous, if you just say, hey, like just stop smoking or just stop eating, but they don't know, then they're just sitting there and they're nervous. And it's like, well, what are they supposed to do? Like,
Yep.
Yeah, like sometimes you can wait it out, but like sometimes you need some other like method to get out of that space. And so that's why it's like, I've just found that an alternative typically works better than just saying, hey, just don't do that.
No, that's a perfect explanation. It's like it seems simple to me, but I think some people might really have not thought it through, that some of the things you do that you don't like, that you wish you didn't do, actually do serve a functional purpose. They might not help you with your long-term goals, but they certainly help you achieve something in the short term. One of the most obvious ones is someone who is trying to lose weight, but who tends to eat in response to stress. So you're a quote-unquote emotional eater. And this isn't to say that you shouldn't eat for emotional reasons. There's nothing wrong with that. However, if it is something that's actively getting in the way of your goals, like you said, Steve, then some people are like, all right, well, I need to stop doing that. Well, how? And even if you were successful, how do you deal with that emotional stress? If you don't have other tools, if you don't know to, meditate or journal or call your mom, whatever it might be for you, you have to do something to manage that stress in your life because you found a coping strategy. Unfortunately, that coping strategy doesn't mesh with your goals. So I think that's a nice little primer so we can understand kind of the basis of how to evaluate habits and what might be a good tool to replace them. Now, here's where the rub comes in, and that's you, Berto. You're the rub. And that's contest prep, all right? So for contest prep, I think this is something that we often see. Like we'll see some people who walk around relatively lean, but they're essentially living that contest prep life, The eating patterns that some people fall into during contest prep, which can be very facilitative. Those habits are there to address specific needs that are temporary, hopefully, if you're doing it right during contest prep. The kind of hunger we deal with, the need for precision, the stuff we do to try to not only support training, but also support a slightly less food-focused or hunger-filled lifestyle. I think that might be some useful perspective. So I think, Berto, I'd love to hear from you, your general thoughts on the habits which make sense to maintain during prep, which maybe don't make sense to maintain outside of prep. And then we can also start talking about the things that maybe we should be doing in our off season differently that should carry over. So let's start there. I know it's a big can of worms, but I know you got a can opener, my friend.
Yeah. Well, kind of playing off what Steve said first, because the goal of getting on stage and the leanness requirements are just so out there for most people. And this is regardless of division now, I think. Like, it used to be like, hey, you could just be a men's physique dude. Hey, you could just do bikini. But they all evolve and develop, and they almost look like bodybuilding with slightly different poses and slightly different priority in regards to which muscles, right? Like Steve, it's like, where are you now? I think that's really important when someone wants to do this whole contest prep thing, because quite often we have to break it to them that, hey, this is too many quantum leaps away right now. There's all these things that we have to sort out in the middle before, otherwise it's going to be brutal. It's going to make no sense to you. And we're probably going to, delay your growth when it comes to forming the habits that we want you to have when you do contest prep. So yeah, quite often, I think all of us coaches will hear 3D Muscle Journey. It's like there's a huge chunk of people who were like, you know what? I think this timeline makes more sense because it's going to give us more time to work on just some of the prerequisites in regards to habits and skills that you might have skipped out on. Mm-hmm. So yeah. So this person, okay, they got that out the way. They're doing their contest prep thing now. There's just so many things.
You want me to give you a more direct entry point?
Yeah, because it's like, wow, there's this, there's that. Some people might even find out that something, not always the case, but sometimes it does happen that you discover during you did mention this during contest prep that you're like, you know what, they're worth keeping in. Yep. This makes a lot of sense. But yeah, let's pick apart a specific angle.
So here's one for you is, I think these are helpful because sometimes they seem like contradictions to what we might generally recommend or what is generally recommended in the quote unquote evidence-based community. For example, meal timing. Here's one that I think is pretty useful to use as a foil. Generally, if someone is trying to gain muscle strength and support their training, the guidance is eat at least 3 times per day, roughly spread your protein, and that's about it. Meal timing, not a huge deal for your chest and back day. During contest prep, it's not necessarily from a energetic standpoint, but I really do recommend most of my athletes when they're home and operating in their normal quote unquote environment to have roughly set meal schedule, at least a number of meals per day, so they can get into this habituated pattern. I find personally that is a really good way to kind of create a structure for the day and more consistent weigh-ins, more consistent performance, and a more consistent feeling so that we can kind of have a baseline to operate from. So that's just one example, Berto. Are there other things that you find you like to institute as far as structure or patterns that you find really are facilitative to the contest prep process that is not something you would be like at a general seminar, like, hey, who wants to get jacked and huge? Well, you need to have a big salad at night, type of thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Predictability over the course of the day, the week, and I think this extends to things outside of just eating. So, for example, enough sleep or having a sleep schedule that, maybe isn't as naughty as it might be in the off season when you can get away with it. So yeah, I'd say that's probably the biggest one is and you kind of find yourself doing it anyways. I think especially the first few times where, if anything, most of us turn too much into a hermit when we're getting to the grindy part of a contest prep. But some of it might be, I think, warranted the first few times you go about that, and then over time we can probably make it a little bit more pliable and have date night up until a certain point, things like that. But initially it's like, yeah, I think maybe after once we're at the 12 to 16 week mark, maybe we just, you can say no to things every once in a while. Like you don't have to do this, you don't have to do that. I think that's a big one that, the bodybuilders we grew up with, like that was, remember the Animal Pack ads, which I think a lot of our listeners are probably too young to recall. Like that's what they were based upon, was the fact that, hey, I'm just have my head down and I'm just going to get to work and forget about everything else in life because I have these goals. I think during a contest prep, to a certain extent, you do kind of have to pick your battles a little bit more, especially the first few times. And once you've kind of been through that, then hey, we can be a little bit more pliable. But yeah, and especially with the flexible dieting revolution, I think that was a big one initially when, we kept having those conversations with athletes that, hey, just because like Matt Ogus finds himself at an IHOP like on a random Wednesday doesn't mean you have to do that, or not yet, anyways. So yeah, just I guess big lifestyle changes across the board, but that's just kind of how it is at a certain point when you are an athlete, I feel. And for a lot of people, this is probably their first experience where they there's a lot of non-athletes that decide to do this bodybuilding thing, it seems. So, they haven't, I guess, like lived that sort of lifestyle yet. At least not compared to how it might have been, since we've kind of loosened up the reins a bit in regards to like what things you have to check off in the off season in order to have a successful off season. Other things, it's kind of besides the point, but I like, and this actually, no, we're going to work on things that don't translate over to the off season.
We'll get there though.
Yeah. I'd say probably choice of foods is probably a big one. As long as it doesn't get too funny and we're not, eating 3-pound bowls of just fiberish glop throughout the day. It's definitely something where, maybe in the off season, it's like you encourage them to have a more inclusive diet, or it's like, hey, you could have your baseline foods, the more typical stuff, but hey, include some of the things you do like in there, because, food isn't just for function. We should enjoy what we eat. And during a prep, it does become one of those things where it's like, hey, maybe that pre-workout Snickers bar that you have, maybe that should turn into something that just makes you feel a little better throughout your whole training session. So the diet at a certain point, kind of depending on the person, probably is going to look a little bit less inclusive than I would like as a long-term habit.